Okay, we've got some hellos in the chat, so that at least gives us a sense that we are here. Wendelin, why don't you start off by introducing yourself?
Okay, I'm Wendelin Gray, and I have a number of self-published novels that I've done, mostly in the horror, fantasy, Asian-themed type of genre. I have a very specific niche that I do, and I'm a linguist, dancer, all that kind of stuff, and I worked for over a dozen years for an Asian culture organization locally. So that's part of my whole background, everything that I do.
And our other two panelists were the Brandons, Brandon Ketchum and Brandon McNulty, who may be joining us at some point. There was a certain unclarity whether we all had to change our name to Brandon for the panel. Ah, Brandon Ketchum is here.
I wasn't going to change my name to Brandon.
No,
even if they asked me, I wasn't going to do that.
You made a good joke. I'm Heather Rose Jones. My first novel, Daughter Mystery, was published in 2014 by Bella Books, which is a small press specializing in lesbian fiction. It's a romantic Ruritanian historic fantasy. And I will start off by saying that my anarchy and chaos of my first publication came largely from coming out of a SFF culture and having expectations set by 40 years of going to conventions and listening to talk about what publishing is like, and then having my first book be published within a different genre and different publishing community entirely, and therefore having this bad mismatch of expectations. Hi, Brandon.
Hi. Well, technical difficulties, I guess, but I made it. I'm Brandon Ketchum. I have published quite a lot of short fiction, probably 25 or 30 stories. I have not managed to break into the book industry, however. I haven't managed to get a novel published, and I think that's probably a good reason why I'm on this panel, to talk about the trials and travails of doing that.
Are you the Brandon who was supposed to be our moderator?
I'm not sure. Nobody told me that I was going to be a moderator, but...
Okay, well, I kind of stepped into the role, so I'm
fine.
Do it. I'm pushy that way.
No, that's perfectly fine.
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we all have, different angles on coming into publishing. Since the theory here is the anarchy and chaos, why don't we all share some aspect of that chaos? What was your most unexpected experience in first coming into publishing?
Can you start, Wendelin? I'm going to email the other Brandon.
Well, I don't know exactly how to answer that, because I started studying creative writing back whenever I was in college, which was not my major. I was a linguist and a culture expert in a different region than where I am now. But my experiences back then, I really kind of got disillusioned by it, and I decided that I wasn't going to do anything in the field for a really long time. And as I got involved in the local arts community, with the Asian culture and the promotion of that, and suddenly I realized self-publishing had kind of caught up to where I was. I realized that I could do my own stuff, and I felt a lot better about that. So I didn't really focus on the traditional side, but the problem is, and I guess maybe where the chaos comes into it with self-publishing, is that you need a platform, and even then it's not easy, and you need a marketing plan. I think that that's probably the biggest thing that I'd emphasize, because any of this, and I know that even the traditional publishers have a hard time with marketing, that it's like you really need to know at least, and be realistic about what you're going to achieve, regardless of which level you're at, the traditional self-published, or you're in the magazine, fanzines, and all that. You still have to have at least a little bit of savvy about the promotion, more so even than, oh, I've got this great story.
And I think for me, one of the big mismatches had to do with the expectations and the advanced knowledge. Not so much that, I expected to do a certain amount of promotion, but I did not know what the expectations were from my publisher as to what was their image of what would happen, what parts were they doing or not doing that I was expecting them to do. So as I say, I was accustomed to people talking about SFF publishing, whether small press or major press. and there's this whole this cycle, this rhythm, this, you know, the arcs, and, you know, the reviewers, and getting your book listed in the locus releases and things like that, where I had never really thought about the fact that a non-SFF publisher wouldn't not so much wouldn't know about the specific venues, but wouldn't have the same expectations. And so there I am, and my book is out, and it's like, okay, so which reviewers did you send copies to? And they're saying, reviewers? Well, I guess if you want us to send books to reviewers, we could do that. Yeah. And it was quite a culture shock. It wasn't until, you know, my second book that I kind of had a plan set up and said, it's like, okay, I know what they're not going to do, and therefore I know what I need to start planning for well in advance.
So I see our other Brandon has joined us.
You're twins, like for real.
I could not get the link to work, so apparently I am Brandon Ketchum Part 2.
You are also Brandon Ketchum.
It's listing it as such. Hey everyone, I'm Brandon McNulty, that's who I really am, but I'm the author of Bad Parts, which is a supernatural thriller about a group of townspeople who trade away their sick and injured body parts to an organ swapping demon. And I am also, I also run the YouTube channel Writer Brandon McNulty, where I give weekly writing advice.
So we've been doing I kind of stepped in to do some prompting and moderating, which I think you're the one who was supposed to be the moderator, or
was I?
Maybe it was supposed to be me. I'm not sure.
There was. I only saw like very little on the description. It was just like, yeah, you're going to talk about your publishing journey. So.
Well, you know, just step in, and as long as we can all speak, I think
we'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
why don't you tell us about your what was the biggest thing that hit you that created chaos in your initial publication experience?
Go for it.
And this is me?
Yeah.
Okay. So
your last names, because otherwise.
Yeah, McNulty. Yeah. So, all right. But so my publication journey was interesting, to say the least. I wrote Bad Parts back in, I want to say a few summers ago. And in 2017, I applied for this contest called Pitch Wars. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about it, but it's basically this contest where you can submit a portion of your novel to a number of potential mentors, and if they're interested in you, that they like your book, they will take you on board for 2-3 months. They'll work with you and they'll help polish up your manuscript. And so I was lucky enough to win that back in 2017. And at the end of Pitch Wars, there's this agent round where you work with, or you submit like the first couple pages of your book, your genre, your word count, and your synopsis. And if you're lucky, an agent will pick you. I was one of 50 adult fiction entries, like YA adult, all that stuff. I was one of 50 adult entries. I was the very last person to get an agent request, and it was just crushing. So what really hurt me was that and I have learned since then, if you see at the bottom of my book right here, it says Bad Parts, a supernatural thriller. When I was in Pitch Wars, I listed it as supernatural horror, which I learned horror does not sell the best. So that really hurt me in the week of the agent period. And toward the end, I asked my mentor, hey, can we switch it to dark fantasy? The exact day I switched it to dark fantasy, I got a request. I mean, it was just like, what I'm trying to say, be careful what you label your book and try and figure out which genre would be the most, I don't want to necessarily say profitable because you don't know how well it's going to sell, but most receptive to audiences in general. I mean, if you are on the line between, in my case, horror and thrillers are going to sell better. I mean, I tacked on supernatural thriller, and I mean, it could go either way. So if you have that option, go with the more palatable one to audiences.
And I can chime in here. I remember, because the other Brandon Ketchum and I, Brandon McNulty, we're pretty close, and we've roomed at a few conventions and things like that. And I remember a lot of talks where he said, you know what, that's it. I'm really going to go to panels about the business side of writing. I'm going to go at my own. I'm going to get, artists, covers everything, the whole 9 yards. And whereas myself, I could probably have self-published a couple of books by now. But the problem is Brandon, as we call him, Brandon the Lesser, Brandon the Greater, purely based on size, has a very good social media presence. He's got that YouTube channel going, and he has a lot of active followers. I don't, and I have no idea how to get a social media platform going. And I have no idea how to self-promote. I really muddled through it when I was the editor of Parsec Short Story Contest, and a lot of help from Karen Young-Lutz in the marketing campaign. So I am strictly pursuing the traditional publishing route, and that is a difficult route. That's a very tough route.
Wendelin, you said you had done the self-publishing route?
I have not.
Oh, no, Wendelin.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, actually, I wanted to speak to that a bit. I think that some of the problem that I see, because since I was doing this myself from the start and would never have considered traditional publishing, just for my own reasons, I knew that I would have to jump in and be a lot more flamboyant and be very proactive. I've gotten a couple of awards and everything, and gotten at least some critical acclaim. And of course, I'm in a niche that isn't going to have tremendous sales anyway. But the idea is, I think these days, the things that get people's attention on social media are maybe not always the healthiest things to be following. A lot of it is, you either have to and I hate to be crude about it, but you have to post pictures of your bare butt, or, you have to get involved in really fractious political arguments in order to get a lot of people to come after your pages and to really follow you. If you stay, and this is something that we used to talk about with the film festival I worked on, because I was on programming for a Pan-Asian festival and all of that, the director used to say that the only way you could get media attention is if you shoot a dog. You had to be more outrageous and more offensive every time you tried to get anybody to do anything, because that's all that got the eyeballs. And they kind of scoffed at the way I was going, because I refused to do that. And I have a very specific, and I don't care, I'm at a point where whatever, I want what I want out there, and I don't really want anybody to tell me what to do. I don't really want to buy into this whole thing. I'm willing to go the other route and maybe not get the sales for it. But the idea is that I wanted it to stay, the calm place where people could come if they wanted to get away from all of that stuff and to just stay on message and to not be moved either way. There are trade-offs with that. But I do think that a lot of the problem right now is that people just want to fight. And so if you're not fighting on your blog and you're not fighting on or you're not barren at all, then it's very hard to get people to do anything and really engage.
Yeah, I know the one thing that I did proactively before my first book came out was I got involved in Twitter. I had a Twitter account before, but hadn't really engaged in it. And I'd picked up on the place you go to talk to fellow authors is Twitter. And that did work for me very nicely. People have asked me, why didn't I go the self-publishing route? And of course, I have crippling self-doubt and imposter syndrome. So I could have self-published my book, and then it would have sat there and nobody would ever have known about it. And
this is my fear as well.
This is marketing. That's the whole problem.
I could have tried going for a major publisher, but back when I was ready to shop this around in 2010, I looked around and I did not see major science fiction fantasy publishers publishing such overtly queer stories as what I had written. And I did see people talking about how they had been asked to tone down the queerness in their fantasy novels. So I looked at that and I said, the way to be true to my book is to go to a queer publisher. And then for that, I traded away, some of the respect that you get from being with a major publisher.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of where I'm coming from too, because I'm doing stuff, because I spend so much time consuming Asian media, and I spend a lot of time, working on my advanced language skills in this region. I write exclusively, with more races than just East Asian, but it's very East Asian focused, and it's a lot of it is older female characters. So these are not things that traditional publishers love either, and I didn't want to compromise that.
One of the things.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I ended up with Bad Parts, I ended up self-publishing it. And what was a deciding factor for me was, I mean, it's a dark, gritty novel, and I am very, I'm a control freak. And when it got to the point where, yeah, you too, exactly. But I mean, like when it got to the point where I was like asking myself, like as I'm going through edits and I'm saying to myself, okay, would I have to cut this? And how would I feel if like I finally got an agent and I said to myself, okay, well, the agent wants this cut, and then, okay, then the agent takes it to the publisher, and then the publisher wants something else cut. And then it just gets watered down until it's just, it's not what I had in mind. It's not my vision. So, I mean, that is, I think, one of the major pluses to self-publishing. If you do go that route, you do get to keep as much of your integrity as you want to keep in regards to this.
I've even heard stories of where some authors, even some very well-known ones, were actually told completely to change everything by their editors and publishers at one point. And, for me, especially now that I'm not 25 anymore, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want. And, if that means that it costs me sales, and whatever. I mean, it's not fun, but I mean, I'd still rather be true to what I want to do and the message that I don't see out there. And, the kind of stuff that's being ignored because they chase after whatever's popular, which isn't always what's good. I mean, some of this stuff doesn't last either, and that's also a question. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Speaking of not being 25, what really hit me last year when I decided that, okay, I'm done going the traditional route. I had been querying agents for well over a year, and some of them had my full manuscript. They were taking forever with it. And I was at World Fantasy Con with Brandon, and we met this one author, and she was talking to me one night about how she had this werewolf novel, and she had it with an agent for 3 years, and it still hadn't gotten published. And that to me was like 3 years. Like I'm 30 right now, and I look at like last year I was 29 when I was there, and I was like doing the math. I'm like, do I really want to wait maybe another year to get an agent, and then possibly another 3 years to get it published? I mean,
yeah,
I just couldn't do it.
Time.
Yeah, it's so slow. I can't deal with it.
I'm still waiting. So
my first book was published when I was in my mid-50s. So
yeah, I was like 43 whenever I started thinking about it again. So
something that was brought up was the online route. So aside from Pitch Wars, you have things like Pitch Mad and all its different variations. And the one thing I noticed from that, I've been very frustrated by that. The one thing I noticed from that, and it's in a vacuum, it's not neither good nor bad, is if you don't have either the next great idea, or if you have the next great idea and it's not your demographic, then you're going to have a hard time getting traction. I know Own Voices is huge right now, and I've suffered, I think, in one of my books because it's kind of an infringement on Own Voices. It's about an intersex main character with an identity crisis. Now, I started and finished it before this became a big thing, but I was kind of floored. I'm like, I thought I'd get some retweets. I thought I'd get more than one publisher over several cycles liking it. And like I said, I'm not complaining, just I think it's the fact in the industry right now that I'm not going to get an agent or sell a book on an intersex character. That's just the way it is. And my other works either weren't necessarily good enough or didn't catch the eye, and that's part of the beast. So I've not done well with the, Pit Mad and all the other Pit Dark and all the other ones, but they can be, and I've watched them for some authors be a great way. Boom, they get out there, they get retweeted a lot, lots of likes. It's the thing that the industry wants. Yeah. So you got to believe in yourself first, that it's what the industry wants, and then you have to kind of cross your fingers and hope.
To speak to that, I've actually heard some other self-published authors in some of the places where I usually sell when it's not a pandemic year, that some of the reasons why they decided to do self-publishing was they saw a lot of derivative stuff that was getting published and they felt that they couldn't deal with it. So you have like Jane Austen with zombies, and you've got a lot of rehashes of all the stuff that's in public domain already. They don't want anything new, or they don't know how to promote anything new, because I've seen that discussion in the movie industry a lot since I was on programming for films. for this film festival. So the idea is that there are very deep psychological methods that they use for marketing, but once they get that hook into the public, it's very hard to move them into a different area where there's new stuff. They only want the old stuff that they've had before. And then the other thing that he said was that the 50 Shades of Grey picking up a publisher was the end for the one guy. He was like, they've been telling me for years they don't want my stuff, but then they go and get this person who can barely write a sentence because it was going to make them a ton of money. And he got really disgusted and decided, well, the heck with it then. I should just go self-publish, because if that's what they're taking, I mean, how does that what I want to do? I mean, you hone your craft and you try to come up with good stories, and nobody cares. They just want to either have stuff that they already know, or they just want stuff that make a ton of money, doesn't matter the quality. So
I think that, so people have been talking about, the not wanting to wait for the cycle of, the looking for an agent and the getting read by a major publisher. And this is something I hear a lot, which is that people are getting accustomed to a different rhythm of publishing. And I know that, so for my first novel, I submitted it to my first choice publisher of the short list of, small queer presses, and it got accepted a month later. And right now I have a novella out on submission that has been out on submission for over 2.5 years. And I went into this with very different expectations. I think if it had taken me over 2 years to get a response on my first novel, I would have been crushed and devastated. And now that I've got 4 books out and I'm feeling a little bit more sure of myself, then I'm willing to say, hey, I've got this other property. I'm willing to invest some time in seeing if I can open up an entirely different market, a different part of my career with that, because I've got this other stuff going on. What do people think about sort of the rhythms of publishing these days?
Well, the rhythm and the patience. I mean, you need to have the patience of Job. Even people that succeed, it's very rare that you succeed with your first book.
Yeah.
A well-known writer with Tor now, Ferret Steinmetz, he had it in the back of one of his books. I can't remember which one, but he wrote out the story. My first book was my 7th book that I wrote. And he was about ready. It was a great tale. He was about ready to give up. And, this new one was the novel he went to work on when he was about ready to give up. But yeah, think about the number of years it takes to write 7 books and try to get, agents with those 7 books. I'm in my 4th real work in progress. I think this one's a winner. Of course, I thought the last one was a winner. And, I just have to have the mindset, soldier on. Because otherwise you're just going to, I don't want to give in to imposter syndrome and say, wow, obviously I'm not good enough if no agents want to look at it. It can be a variety of reasons why they're not looking at it. It can be that I absolutely suck at query letters. So for those of you out there that really want to go the traditional route, early and often work on your query letter craft.
Absolutely. And one thing, when you said about the pacing and things like that, with me, I have always been, I'm always this paranoid guy who thinks like, oh man, if I don't write every day, like I'm just gonna, my powers are gonna dissolve or something like that. But I've been constantly writing, and last year I worked on the first book in a new series. Bad Parts is a series, and I also have another one I'm working on. I'm hoping to release that new one early next year, and if not, middle of next year or whenever. Again, another benefit of self-publishing, you do it on your own time. Now, the thing is, your readers, once you build a fan base, they will expect that, they'll expect it if you deliver every 6 months, they'll say, well, where is it every 6 months? Or if it's a year, where is it each year? And I'm hoping to be one of those types of authors who, puts a book out there every 6 months, maybe alternating back and forth between a series and another series, just so I don't burn out. And so hopefully the readers don't burn out either. But from what I hear, and I've heard this at a lot of different conferences, they usually say it takes about 3 books for you to get traction with an audience. And whether those 3 books are all in one trilogy or whether they're, standalones, but the more you put out there, the more chances you have of reaching an audience.
I was interested in one part of the title of this panel. It says the anarchy and chaos behind the fantasy of publishing your novel. What fantasy did you have about becoming published that either came true or did not come true?
I think I fulfilled the non-fantasy, because when I started, I'm like, all right, it's going to take forever. You might not get it on your first book, just be patient. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The fantasy was that, within a book or two that I'd at least start getting some nibbles, full requests, and that it would soon move on to a couple of offers here and there. It hasn't lived up to that, but I've expected that. And I can see the flaws in each of my other books. So I'm cognizant of what I need to work on. And with this other guy's help, I think I'm doing a pretty good job of that.
Wendelin.
I would have to go back to my 17-year-old self or my college-age self whenever I really thought that this was like, oh, well, this is actually something maybe I want to try to do. And I studied the industry and took a few creative writing courses and all that, had a mentor and all. The reality was rather different. I wasn't entirely expecting it to be about quality, because in my classes back in the day, you didn't do genre. If you did genre, you were considered a commercial hack. You were, sort of like, it wasn't considered good stuff, no matter how good it actually was technically. You were supposed to be writing literary, high literary. So I kind of already knew that. But the reality was, like, I did one query and I got this letter back from this guy, and I looked at it, and his response was something like, well, what do you have that's going to make me rich? And when I looked at that, I thought, okay, this isn't what I thought this was going to be at all. I mean, this is supposed to be about art, and it's supposed to at least be somehow about story and quality of writing. And, like, you sit in these seminars and everything, and you learn your craft and you try to write a good story, and it's supposed to be about self-expression, and it's like a used car salesman kind of response. And it turned me off a lot. And, so that was like the big thing, the big fantasy ending, and that ended very early. I didn't write for like 12 years. And I had like big gaps even then. I think that my stories have like at least 10 to 12 years between my phases of writing. That the last time in 2003, I stopped writing, and I thought, because I looked into self-publishing at that point, it wasn't caught up to where I was. And I thought, I'm just going to put these away, and I'm never writing again. So
That's my big fantasy. And this was before I had really crunched the data on my potential publishers to try. And I had the big fantasy that, I would send it off to one of the, big, however many the number is currently, publishers, and they would recognize my brilliance, and that would get me an agent, and I would move forward, and everything would happen. Mm-hmm. And of course it didn't happen because either I made the right choice in terms of going for a different market, or because I choked and made the the wimpy choice. Time will tell. But I did have that fantasy of being an overnight success and being recognized for my brilliance, and people would come to me and tell me how brilliant I was and how wonderful my writing was, as opposed to me having to tell them.
Yeah, I think that's a fantasy I'm still clinging to, sorry. I've overlooked some small presses. Looking them up, they didn't have a great reputation anyway, but I've got that idea. And even my last name's letter has the right spot on the shelf, right at eye level. I want it in Barnes & Noble. And you know what? That might not be the case. There are a lot of big name authors that aren't in Barnes & Noble, so maybe too much fantasy.
Yeah, and my fantasy was pretty much, the conventional one, I'm going to get the book deal, I'm going to get the movie deal, and so on and so on. And when I was, as I mentioned in Pitch Wars, there were actually a few people in there who did get movie deals already, like within the past 3 years. And, seeing myself in that group there, it was like, oh, wow, it's doable. But it's like, it's frustrating because I'm not there yet. And I think another thing that was like the fantasy for me was my book. Like, I always saw it as something original, something that hadn't been done before. I don't know any other horror stories about organ swapping demons. So I was like, oh man, that's going to just launch me to the top. You know, it's something original, but originality, like we talked about, is not necessarily what people are looking for.
It's not at all what they're looking for.
Yeah,
that's the problem. Yeah.
They want more of the same, or they want the same but done differently.
They want the original version of the thing they already like.
Yes.
Think about it.
They want to make sure that it's going to make money, and the only way that they think to do that is to look at, okay, Harry Potter made all this money, so we need knockoffs of Harry Potter and like do it to death until nobody can stand to read anything like that anymore, because we think that that's what everybody wants. Yeah.
Think about it in query letters and in Pit Wars and Pit Mad. What do they always want? What are your comps?
Yeah.
What can you compare this book to?
Yeah.
So there's a question in the chat window that matches very nicely to where this conversation is going. So this is from Joyce Bevich asking, do any of you know the demographics of your audience, and do you write for a specific type of reader? Wendelin, I think you've already said that you write for yourself.
Well, I mean, that's true, but I also do keep in mind, because of course I worked for a film festival that was Pan-Asian, going over the same area of this old Silk Road, that, you know, people who are interested in that region, people who want that kind of cultural reference, that people who are in international marriages, people who have adoptees from that region. These are the types of people that I see coming to my table whenever I sell. And also I've had some of my people who bought my book come back and say, and this is why I got a couple of the awards that I did, they suggested that it was more for younger kids, even though I don't write for younger kids. It's hysterical. But I did submit it for young adult, and I got a tweens award and all of that. But they suggested that it would be something that younger kids who are precocious readers would be interested in. So they've kind of suggested it too. But I mean, I do at least have a general idea that it is, you know, the second gen for the immigrant community and this sort of thing, that at least in the back of my mind, I don't have that single reader that they say you should have. But I do know that that's who I'm kind of talking to with some of this.
It's cliched, but I write the book that I would want to read. And, you know, I don't aim for any particular demographic or anything like that. And I ended up being surprised by some of the people who did enjoy my book. Like, before it launched, I signed up for this service called NetGalley, which is a website where you can post your book and early reviewers can get it for free and take a look at it. And I never expected, like, a 60-year-old British woman to give it 5 stars and love it to death. I mean, it was just like, it just never crossed my mind. I thought it would be people my age, like, you know, who would be into my book. And you'd be surprised, like the different people who, you know, all different age groups and whatever it is. But I mean, I'm just, for now, I'm just doing what I've been doing. I, you know, write the book I want to write. I'm not going to let demographics get and muddy it or anything like that.
Well, Brandon, you got me to write down something. I said, "Ooh, that's a note I need to take." NetGalley. That sounds like a good.
NetGalley, yes, definitely. If you are, if you do have a book coming up, or you're planning on self-publishing, or you are, you know, going the traditional route, make sure your book gets on NetGalley, because it's a pretty active community. I was very surprised, and there's actually there's a way you can get it, like. The main way of getting your book on NetGalley costs around like $200, but there's a way you can get it on there for a month for like $40. I think if
you're a SFWA member, you can do it through SFWA for part of your membership.
If you're not SFWA, there's a blog post by Kindlepreneur. He gives a lot of indie publishing advice, and if you just type in Kindlepreneur, NetGalley, there's a blog article, and it gives you the code you need to get it for $40, which was well worth it, considering I was getting people all over the world reading the book.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could have told you who my target audience was when I started, because like so many people, it's like I was writing the book that nobody had written for me yet, the one that I was looking for all my life and had never found. And the one thing I definitely learned was I was not writing for my publisher's default audience who were looking for contemporary romance, which has been, part of the chaos of my experience when you're essentially the ugly duckling in the brood. But I have found my readership. So in putting the books out, this oddly assorted group of readers have mapped out who I am writing for by means of simply existing and letting me know. It's like, oh my God, you wrote the book I wanted to read. And it's not a target audience I could have predicted. It's not one that really has any clear demographics. I mean, it's not even all, queer women, which, one might think, but it is interesting.
So for the most part, I'm kind of similar to the other Brandon. I don't look at what a target audience is. I don't instead write for myself. I write whatever best idea comes into my head. I get a lot of ideas. A lot of them are for short stories, but when I get a good idea, I want to run with it. I really love grimdark, so I started a book because I'm like, I have a great idea for a grimdark. It literally started with, a picture of a farmer standing in a blood-soaked field surrounded by bodies, and like, farming is really tough these days. Turned out to not be a grim dark. It was just a dark fantasy, but that's why I wrote that one. I'm a behavioral health therapist. I work with clients with mental health issues, so my current work in progress has a main character whose vulnerability to and access to the magic system is through her mental health. Of course, I did make the one cardinal sin with the first main book I wrote, and here's a big do not do to everybody out there. Do not write the book you think the market wants. Because number one, by the time it gets to any market, that's not what the market's going to want. And number two, if it's not what you want to write, you're going to have a hard time. I took 5 years to write that book because I kept setting it aside, coming back, and I wanted to finish it. It was literally, urban fantasy's hot right now. I'll write one of those. How do I do that? Start in Pittsburgh and go from there. Yeah. Didn't work out. It was a decent book, but didn't work out.
So we've gotten around the time of the panel when we are open to taking questions. And I know that there have been a couple of, one clear question for the panel that I already passed on. If you have questions, either type them in the chat window or on the Q&A window, and we will see what we can do with them. And in the meantime,
you have more to say?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of another prompt.
I had something I want website out there for everybody.
Go ahead.
Working on that query letter. The biggest thing is getting critique, as in most of writing. And I hope the website is up. It was down for a long time because it was attacked. Absolute Right has a forum called Query Letter Hell, where you have to critique at least 50 query letters before you can get yours critiqued. And then it's expected you're critiquing people's letters, they're critiquing yours. It gets to a point where you have to decide what's the best critique, because obviously it can be the best query letter in the world that you've refined and somebody's going to find issue with it, but it's immense help.
Query letter hell sounds redundant. I mean, it goes without saying. So.
Yeah, right. But they're not messing around. I'll put that up there on the chat.
So
yeah,
we have a question. Have any of us sought publishing via podcast to reach a wider audience or a new audience? And I know, Brandon McNulty, you have a podcast. Is that a place where you spread your fiction, or is that more blog-like?
So that my YouTube channel is more blog-like. It's basically just me talking for 4 to 8 minutes about some aspect of writing. Where the mission statement of my channel was like, I wanted to teach people things that I wish I knew when I was a younger writer, because there were so many points along my publishing or my writing career where it was like, oh, if I knew this 3 years ago, I'd be so much further along. Or if I knew this, when I started, it would have, saved me from writing 2 bad novels or something like that. So that's what I aim for every week, is just to, impart something that maybe other people haven't come across yet that can help them as they're, getting along their journey. As far as podcasts, the person who asked it, I'm not sure. When you say podcast, do you mean like an audio drama? Because that's a thing.
Clarifying podcasts, story podcasts like Podcastle, Wicked Library, etc.
Oh, okay. I've submitted to them, but they never accepted any of my short stories, so no.
I've also submitted to there.
I have a fairly extensive experience with podcasts because I started one. So right around the same time that I published my first novel, I started a blog on academic research into queer women's history. That was basically the research I do for writing historical fiction and then making it available to other people. And a year into that blog, I started a podcast based on it. So it started out just essays on historical topics around queer women. And then it exploded and it turned into a weekly show where I'm also talking about the field of lesbian historical fiction and having author interviews. And around about the third year, I started publishing fiction. So my podcast now publishes 4 stories a year of original fiction, paying pro rates, in the general field of sapphic historical fiction or historical fantasy. So I kind of came at it from the other side of saying, I want there to be more of this out here, and what I am doing is podcasting. I'm not set up to be like a print publisher. I can't manage that, but I had a podcast already, and it was just a matter of adding in a different type of content. I've also had 2 stories published in Podcastle. So I really love it as a venue because it makes a different type of story shine. A very narrative type, storytelling type story will really shine in a podcast, especially if you get a talented narrator.
So I do have a story in a podcast like that. I don't know if you're familiar with the Centropic Oracle, and I can post a link to it. Weirdly enough, it's a story that I'm going to be reading in the morning at my reading, but it's really fascinating to hear your story read out and online where everybody can find it by a narrator, and wow, that's what it sounds like. It's a really neat experience.
I have a couple comments on both of those things. From self-publishing's perspective, like for the query letter, you really should have at least a sentence or 2, very concise description of your book, whatever it is, elevator speech, ready at all times. Whether you're going to type it somewhere, whether you're going to tell somebody who's coming up to you and asking you about your books. And the other thing, I don't do podcasts, but I do I actually do kind of long video series on my YouTube channel where I actually read excerpts of my stories, and I have like a roll call because people always have problems pronouncing my characters' names. So I have a video where I just pronounce their names and explain them a little bit more. I do have a newsletter that's more academically oriented that I do twice a year that you have to sign up for. And then I have blogs that are related to my field again, which is foreign language, particularly East Asian languages, and their traditional cultural background, especially, the traditional literature and all of that. So I have that I cover.
So we have another question, which is asking us, this is Diane Turnshik, asking if we have writing crit groups or crit partners.
Oh, sorry, I was answering that on chat. I don't even know what I'm doing here.
You can just answer it again.
Answer it again, yeah. Go ahead.
Answer it again.
Yeah.
Well, I run the Pittsburgh Writers Meetup Group, which is, it has a core group of veteran writers, but it's really attracts a lot of new writers. Unfortunately, during COVID, we can't meet because our meeting place is not open. But I'm also part of the local meetup group here, Write or Die. It's called Word, but Write or Die, and it meets bi-weekly. We are currently doing online meetings. It's mostly local here to Western Pennsylvania. But I guess in this day and age, really anybody could join. It's not like we can pop out to Jameson's afterwards for wings and beer anyway. But yeah, I find critique groups extremely important. My writing would not be anywhere near what it is without them, and alpha and beta readers as well, especially in this day and age. Hey, can I email you this and can you take a look at it? Really important.
Yeah, I don't have a critique group as such, not the, as you're writing. I do have, a large group of beta readers who, so that I don't, wear any one person out, and I can, solicit, who wants to take this story, who wants to, commit to this novel. In the before times, I participated in a friend's backyard writing workshop thing, which is not critiquing. It's just, we are all going to go sit in the clubhouse in the backyard, and we are going to, sorry, the panel flashed and it distracted me. We are going to sit here and we are all going to write, and we are going to try to avoid devolving into gossip and chit chat. And so it was more of I guess like what people call writing sprints online, except physically. But critique groups have never really worked well for me.
A few years ago, I had a great critique group. We used to meet online every Thursday, and they would just kick my ass on whatever short story I submitted to them. I learned a ton from that critique group. Unfortunately, we kind of, went our separate ways over the past couple of years. Just got busy with different things and like that. And now I'm pretty much in the same situation where, I have to rely on beta readers. And I mean, I have some great ones. They all have like different aspects of story that they can really nail down and tell me, okay, you're doing this well and you're doing this wrong. And I mean, that's the most valuable thing for me right now.
Yeah, I had the critique group, and like I said, I actually formally studied the creative writing aspect at school back whenever I was in high school and in college. And I had an award-winning African-American man writer who was my mentor at that time. And I learned how that whole thing works. And at that point, whenever I finally decided that I wasn't going to go that route, I kind of got away from that whole thing. And at this stage in my life, I'm more interested in writing in my second languages and learning how to do it that way. Because if you start reading, of course, I read a lot of world literature. Everybody was multilingual. It was not just only writing in English. And that creates other problems writing in English, but it is something that I'm more interested at this stage in life, since I know the kinds of things that the critique groups look for. And if I'm not sure, like right now, I'm working on a mystery horror dance centered story, and I've got one of my dancer friends looking over all my writing of the description of the dances. So yeah, so if I really need the expertise, then I will. Otherwise, I don't necessarily, unless there's some specific reason why I'm looking for it.
It's a good point too. You have a dancer friend looking over it. I'm a mental health therapist, but I know somebody who is a psychiatrist, an actual doctor in the field, and knows medications far better than I do. So I was like, hey, can you read this for me? Is this the proper use of medication? Is the proper use of this? Corrected some things, said the rest was good. It's invaluable.
So we've had our 2-minute warning. It's time to wrap up. I know that there is a Discord channel that corresponds to our room where people may be gathering to do post-panel discussion. Why don't we sign out from the panel with pitching in on anarchy and chaos. Are you team anarchy or team chaos?
Maybe chaos.
I'm
I'll go for chaos today.
Chaos rules.
Make it unanimous for team chaos. And
Yeah.
thank you all for coming to this first panel slot of the convention. I hope you enjoyed our panelists. And thank you for a great show.
Fantastic, guys.
Good job,
Great
Heather, by the
moderating.
way.
Thank you.
Good job being the moderator.